Hey everyone, I'm Alex.
And I'm Jack, and I'm also really sick.
And welcome back to our series ranking the bosses of Elden Ring from worst to best. Last time we wrapped up the bottom half of our list, and with that done, we'll finally be getting to the better offerings, although it's still largely populated by smaller scale fights. You know the drill, let's get into it.
This time, or at least for me this time, they smashed their heads on the floor. After peering at this phenomenon from a distance earlier in my playthrough, I was extremely disappointed to see our Ashen Blood infected Siegmeyer clone not utilize this portion of his arsenal at all in his solo bout. Then the gank, which promptly handed my ass to me. Oddly enough, 2 pumpkin heads makes for a real challenge. There's nothing about this boss that's dislikable necessarily, it's just another example of a throwaway mini-boss serving as half-baked closure to a ruins location.
Despite having a name straight out of an NPC Invader name generator, Necromancer Garrus is actually sorta neat. He's packing a variety of Dark Souls 2 style hexes, which is a real blast to the past, and it's neat seeing those again. It'd be a shame not to mention his pet snail, I think? Snails are funny little creatures, I dig them. Not quite man's best friend, but there are definitely worse pets out there, like fire ants, HIV positive chimpanzees, and worst of all, pit bulls. Talking to you, guy from our Force Unleashed 2 video, I fully renounce my token reply of appeasement. This means total war.
I have to admit that Hughes utterly embarrassed me. I found timing his hammer strike fairly easy, but also only rolled through like twice, maybe? To be fair, it was 2:30 in the morning on a Thursday. Keep in mind school for us starts at 7:45, so I was running on like 3% mental capacity. Needless to say, I shit the bed. The Battle Mage did stand out with his flashy sorceries and controversial outfit, and it speaks volumes that even facing a battle-hardened, overpowered, extremely fashionable build, he came close to killing me on several occasions.
This boss is hidden behind a ridiculously convoluted series of prerequisites, so I didn't find my way in until late game. As a result, my fight can only be described as a massacre. As I've said many times before, however, this whole middle part of the list, to me, is almost solely determined on the comedic value of beating up the boss in question. For whatever reason, this bumbling duo really did it for me. No accounting for taste, I suppose.
This ranking is my doing and my doing alone. On a power scale hierarchy, the many variations of the Knight's Cavalry sit just 1 tier below the Tree Sentinel, with the main difference being you can get rid of the horse entirely. Killing the Knight's Cavalry leaves him open to either a riposte or damage boosted spam, although if given enough time he can resummon the horse, albeit with less health. No matter what you do, whether it be a battle of jousting or taking out the horse then the horse rider, the Knight's Cavalry is a very fun boss featuring different iterations with unique weapons that adds further to their overall ranking.
Frenzy is a pretty cool status. I like the visual effect a lot, and it's also not terribly annoying or unfair even if you do get nailed. It's strange, then, that the Frenzied Duelist does not seem to possess the ability to inflict this ailment on you whatsoever. No crazy TF2 unusual effect dies like other frenzied enemies, and no hits he landed ever gave me the effect. That quirk aside, I dig the gladiator style they went with here, being a gladiator helmet owner myself. The swinging ball move is something new, and the axe has some heft in its animations that makes it a cut above other generic axe-wielding foes.
Bowls, the Troll Knight, is just a Troll Knight with a health bar. Giants with swords are no special feat in the grand scheme of Fromsoftware enemy design, and if you're a proper Bloodborne veteran, this fight should prove to be little more than a waste of time.
Watchdog my ass. These things totally look like cats. That design quirk is really endearing to me for some reason though, so I'm not knocking it. I always thought it'd be funny if I got a pet cat and named it something stupid like Bagunk the dog just to confuse people. This is pretty much the inverse of that. The big downside is the way they move in conjunction with their appearance remind me of the Cat O' Luck from Paper Mario Sticker Star, which I have been unsuccessfully trying to erase from my memory for almost a decade. Snails, still like them. Even when they're summoning other bosses, I just can't hate them. This goofy little critter is as defenseless as they come, which is fortunately just the thing to tickle my funny bone. The The visual of crushing this guy with 2 massive greatswords is beyond disproportionate, which cracks me up.
I don't know why they decided to give the Tibia Mariner like the best theme in the entire game. I don't bang out to game OSTs on my own time, but I will give credit where credit's due. This is fit for a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. The Wyndham Ruins Mariner is actually much harder than her previous duplicates thanks to the gigantic skeletons that infinitely attack you unless dealt with. I somehow managed to bug this thing into teleporting onto a mountain 10 kilometers from the actual ruins, so for that alone I look at this version more comedically than her counterparts. However, for once, greater challenge proves to be more of a nuisance than a benefit, leaving the Wyndham Ruins Tibia Mariner well behind the rest.
Eskar is the wildest fantasy of every r/atheism poster. A cool looking warlock with evil, satanic, blood magic, or I guess Mogtanic if we're getting technical. His insect cloud is a bit of a pain in the ass to deal with since it has super good tracking and stuns you a bit, but it's a neat creative move, so I'll cut it some slack. Unfortunately, when it comes to his health pool, he really is about as hard to kill as a Redditor. Read, not vary.
Without Infinity Stone charged skeletons, the Tibia Mariner is a glorified punching bag. I really like the visual design of its attacks, and even though it's one of the easiest bosses in the game, there's just something rewarding about casually dunking on it.
Very similar to his fellow gladiator, but took a lot more of a beating without dying than the other one thanks to his early placement, and he has a hammer, which I think is slightly cooler than an axe. Pretty impressive physique for a guy who lives in one room of a cavern and subsists off of bugs and tomb mold. And they say calisthenics can't get you jacked.
This is yet another mini-boss I am admittedly terrible at fighting. However, this time I feel more comfortable in saying that the ancient hero isn't a cakewalk like many of my other what I'll call struggle bosses. Similar to the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, she has a ghost-like windup to her swings and also features a couple of frost attacks to throw you off, but once you get past her off-putting choreography, she has little to differentiate herself from other humanoid mini-bosses such as the Onyx Lord. Easy with repetition, the ancient hero of Zamor rightfully earns her above-average placement thanks to her telegraphed difficulty.
And finally, we arrive at the original Tree Sentinel, placed in the middle right here between Jack's favorable ranking and my less than favorable one. I wouldn't say I hate these guys or anything, but tend to find horseback foes a bit more annoying than most do. Him being smack dab on the path to the second grace site in the game is pretty funny though, a great noob trap if I ever saw one. This is another boss I think I may have been a bit overly harsh on in the ranking process and definitely could see moving higher. I think I was just salty from that obnoxious fight with 2 of them at once.
With the Crucible Knight being my favorite mini-boss, the Bloodhound Knight is right alongside him as a fellow top 3 Everjail enemy in my opinion. All of his moves are fairly telegraphed enough to where you can nail down most, if not all of his combos and timings in 1 or 2 goes, and also he's like a more balanced Boreal Outrider Knight from Dark Souls 3. Darrowil is absurdly hard as a second or third boss to start a new playthrough, however. I actually just dropped the fight altogether until much later in my Limgrave progress. With a wide variety of moves and combos, the Bloodhound Knight is an exceptional mini-boss for the early game, serving as a major difficulty pedestal relative to his map region.
Here we have the prototype of the endless series of misbegotten goons. I gotta thank this one for giving me my sword of choice for my playthrough, and the fight itself is a good time too. It's simple and sorta bare bones, so I admittedly was riding the high of my closest shave yet if you take a look at my health there, but there's inevitably a bias towards bosses with health bars long enough to take more than 45 seconds to kill, so that bangs out a good 60% of his competition.
Putrid strikes again, this time a reverb of the Grave Warden Duelist and also maybe a top 3 best poison element boss in the history of Souls up to this point. That isn't to say there's a contest of champions for that spot, however it does prove once again that poison as a form of damage output over a passive detriment by way of, say, a pool arena for example, works quite well with reskins. Speaking of, this is one of my favorite looking bosses, which along with the fight itself makes the Grave Warden Duelist one of this game's best dark horses.
I originally had no idea there was even a version of this guy not hailing from Noxtella, and by the time I found him it was game, set, and match. Jack had a pretty fair fight with him, and it seems more or less like the Noxtella variant without a second phase, so lesser by default. Don't get us wrong though, he's a good time, just a bit less so than the other one.
The magma worms are one of the most commonly featured bosses in the game, and luckily for us, they're decent. As the card states, magma worms includes all the worms in the game, specifically the magma worm Makar, all overworld, cave, and tunnel magma worms, and great worm Theodorix. This was a bit of a letdown all things considered. Even an elemental variation would have added something to the worms as a collective enemy. However, a non-story boss with 2 entirely unique phases is a feat in of itself, with the worm going bipedal at 50% health and replacing its never-ending Wiggler move with a catalog of sword and lava combos. To just make a note of it, the Volcano Manor worm was pretty miserable due to its arena constraints, but with a fair fighting space, there's nothing particularly wrong with the magma worms whatsoever.
This weirdly random encounter at the War Shack is a brief teaser of Elmer of the Briar's boss fight down the road, and definitely one of the cooler, weaker version of a later boss enemies out there. I mistook his name as Elmer for like 3 weeks until I accused Jack of misspelling his name and he pointed me to the wiki page stating otherwise. I feel like I can't be alone in this though, tell us if you made the same error. Anyways, his fight is neat with lots of red lasers and spinny sword throws and all that, feels a bit Devil May Cry-esque. My only gripe here is that he hits awfully hard when you do find him, which turns it into a bit of a chugfest. This is one small example of a series of overarching issues I found with Elden Ring's boss fights, which I still generally liked on the whole, but are nonetheless imperfect.
Loretta in Spirit was a standout boss relative to Caria Manor. Her arena was one of the most unique and aesthetically pleasing of the lot, however the fight is essentially a nerfed tree sentinel without attack variety nor a second phase buff as featured in her physical form in the Halleck tree. I find her enjoyable to fight in that you have to balance her magic, knives, and halberd swings, however the punishment for mistiming a roll is extremely minor for early mid-game. Loretta is very decent, just lacking serious challenge and moveset variety.
I might have jumped the gun ranking the Red Wolf higher than it deserved due to being nostalgia baited by his obvious resemblance to Sif. It's a decent fight, but is a bit strangely balanced with high damage and really low health. On New Game Plus especially, this fight is odd, with him going down in very few attacks but also being able to wipe you in 2 moves. I'm a sucker for sword-biting canines, so he still holds up alright, but it's not the soundest footing I've ever stood on, and I'd be hard-pressed to firmly defend this claim.
I'd argue this is the most overrated boss in the game. It's leaps and bounds superior compared to the other most recent FromSoft reindeer, believe me, but with an unspectacular moveset, extremely weak health, and average damage output, the Ancestor Spirit just isn't for me. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the fight, anything but as a matter of fact, I just found little reward in overcoming this slight challenge, although dodging his attacks were admittedly satisfying to pull off. However, outside of generally tame frost attacks, the Ancestor Spirit just isn't deserving of a spot this high in my opinion, only saved by Alex's far more optimistic outlook on the encounter.
A lot of the bosses in the game fight you earlier than their real body does through astral projection or some shit, this being the real deal version of Loretta from Caria Manor. The fight is similar but scaled for endgame stats thanks to her location in the dreaded Halleck tree, meaning she now takes actual effort to kill. This is a change for the better in my book, since there was definitely a neat moveset to be found there, just buried underneath pitiful health that ended the fight before you could really get fired up. Now with nice shiny physically present armor and fancy combat magic, Loretta is refurbished here into a far more compelling foe than she was in the past.
The bell-bearing hunter with a location slapped on the name and not requiring a treasure quest to spawn in. Elmer has an exceptionally awesome attack pool reminiscent of Darth Treya, and the fun of this fight is magnified due to the horrors of the shaded castle preceding it. As one of the most notable location bosses, Elmer's fantastical moveset alone just barely cracks him into the top 30.
We've got a real parade of Crucible Knight placements coming up, but thankfully it happens to fall right on the area divided between videos, so the dose you get next week won't be as concentrated. I rather enjoyed this fight, although I encountered them later than a lot of people did, so that might have played a role in my lack of frustration. Ordovis and his butt buddy are wielding different weapons, so it's not totally a lazy rehash, and I for one enjoy squaring off against the Velstadt-like Ordovis model. Of course, I admit my lack of frustration could be attributed to the broken beyond belief Mimic tier summon. I'm usually a pro summoning purist myself, but it's just so much fun that I can't help it.
Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. As our third of 4 Elden Ring videos, we're close to the end and have finally hit the region of bosses we'd consider greatly enjoyable. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say, comment your thoughts down below. As well, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, not only for the finale of our Elden Ring series, but future uploads every Wednesday as well. Once again, thank you for watching, and with that said, deuces.